This is a story about my dad's ex-girlfriend. My dad has horrible luck with women. He's like a crazy magnet. Every woman he's ever dated, except his current girlfriend, has been abusive both mentally and physically. This list includes my mother, but this is a story about his last girlfriend, Mary. She's gone from not only stalking him, but myself, my husband, and our daughter too. They met at a Christmas party and hit it off. He'd just gotten out of another bad relationship with a different woman that he'd been on and off with for 3 years. She was the classic narcissist type. Well, Mary seemed different. She claimed she was also just out of an abusive relationship. They went out for a few months, but she never let my dad over to her place. He didn't find it all that weird until he received a call from a man who said Mary was his wife and wanted to know how my dad knew her. At first, my dad thought the guy was her ex still trying to control her, but things started to add up. He finally confronted Mary, and she gave him some sob story about how her ex was refusing to sign the papers, but they were separated. My dad did a bit of digging and even talked to Mary's parents at one point. He found out that not only was Mary definitely still married, but she wasn't even separated from her husband. As far as everyone in her life knew, she was happily married, and my dad was just a friend, if they knew about him at all, that is. Needless to say, he broke up with her. She lost it, started showing up at his work, calling in the middle of the night, texting him 50+ times a day, all that good stuff. My dad moved states twice and changed his number several times to try to get away from her, but she always managed to find him. Love letters would arrive in the mail, or she would call and say she was coming to see him. Then she found my phone number. It was probably some time after my dad moved in with me. She started texting me almost as much as him. Once I married my husband and had my daughter, she really went all out, sending me presents for her new granddaughter, always wanting updates and the like. I never replied, and either sent back unopened packages or donated the items she'd sent directly to me from shops. Everything finally came to a head when she arrived on my dad's doorstep while he was at work with a casserole for him. She gave it to his roommate and told him it was because she noticed my dad was losing weight. He told his roommate to toss it. He didn't want to risk poison since he'd just applied for a restraining order. That same night, she showed up at my apartment while my husband worked the overnight shift. It was after 1 a.m. when she started knocking on my door. I was glad that I'd sent my toddler to my aunt and uncle's house for the night when I saw it was her. She left banana bread on my doorstep that we threw out as soon as my husband got home. The next night, I again left my toddler with my aunt and uncle in case she came back. She did. I started getting texts from her as she pounded on my door. She wanted to see her grandbaby and have some girl time with me. It slowly devolved into demands for me to open up the door. I called the cops. While I was on the phone with dispatch, my neighbor came out ready to take her on. He told her the cops were on their way since his wife already called them. She disappeared pretty quick into the park across the street. The cops didn't catch her, but my dad's restraining order did get granted. We have since moved across the state, but she still texts me from time to time, wanting to know how my dad is or what my daughter is up to. I never answer, but I do save all of her texts, just in case I have to get my own restraining order as well. "3 years ago, I tried Tinder for the first time. I was 25 at the time, and while most 25-year-old women have dabbled on Tinder or the like, I hadn't been single since I was 17. I met my ex while I was in high school. 6 years later, we got married, had a baby. I was happy. But those last couple of years together, he had really begun to resent me and the family we'd created together. I fought to keep our relationship together, but the abuse became more frequent and more intense. It got to the point where I took our baby and fled the house in the middle of the night. My mind was scarred, and my heart was raw. It was a really difficult time in my life. A couple of months after I left, I had a new home, a new job, and a renewed sense of life. I was starting to open up and could feel myself healing. I was, however, lonely. I was adjusting to shared custody and spent my weekends alone. I didn't want to jump into a relationship, but I did want to experience some of the things my 8-year relationship hadn't allowed me. Joining Tinder felt fun. It was new and scary, and after so much trauma, it felt nice to have so much positive attention. My self-worth was low, so the cheap compliments and instant gratification of the app felt incredible. Who am I to deserve their attention? Why would they choose to speak to me of all women? Not my healthiest coping mechanism, but I wanted to feel desirable. That's when I met Derek. Derek was an unassuming, average guy. He was cute enough, but not so attractive that I felt self-conscious. Derek and I shared a few interests: craft beer, hiking, and he had a sense of humor that I liked. We agreed to meet up at a local restaurant. I was so nervous. My first date in 8 years. I donned my cutest dress, got made up, and headed out. As I was in the restaurant, my palms were sweaty, my heart was fluttering, and I began to question myself. He arrived, and everything was awkward at first. We ordered our first beers and started to break the ice. As soon as the buzz of the alcohol began to hit, our conversation took off. We had relaxed in each other's company, and the rest of the date went smoothly. We joked about karaoke across town. He laughed about how he didn't like karaoke. I am a huge fan of karaoke. While no superstar, I have spent a good amount of time in choirs and can carry a tune well enough. One of my favorite rowdy weekend activities is going to that bar and busting out some songs with the sweet taste of gin on my tongue. I convinced him to go with me, and we left the restaurant. We sang into the night, taking shots, flirting, laughing. We ended the night in his truck, clumsily fumbling with each other's buttons and zippers, hearts racing with excitement. This had been what I needed. We texted back and forth more often, and soon we were talking about another date. I had enjoyed our time together and liked that I didn't feel a deep connection with him. It was fun, and that was it. Because my heart wasn't tangled up in feelings, he felt safe. We decided for our second date that we would go tubing down a river that runs through our town. We had parked his orange truck at the end of the tubing run and took the tubes in my truck up a river. We agreed that he would zip my truck key with his into a pocket on his shorts and that he would drop me off at my truck afterwards. Bright summer heat warmed our skin, and the water felt crisp and fresh on our toes. The afternoon slipped past as we floated down the river. When we reached the bottom, we deflated our tubes and headed back to my truck. Only when Derek reached into his pocket, his face sank. He looked at me and said, "Your key is gone." I laughed. Surely he was joking. He insisted this wasn't a joke. Gravity pulled at my stomach, and I began to panic. This was the only copy of my truck key, and I'd taken it on the river. I felt foolish and worried about how I would get a new key if we couldn't find it. The river was long. We had been tubing for hours. We'd stopped at several places to swim. He offered to drive me home, and I accepted. During the drive, we made a plan to meet up the next day to search for my key at some of the stops we'd made. We spent the next afternoon combing our swimming holes for my key. Up and down we swam, with very little hope that we would ever see my keys. We had to try though, and we kept at it. From one spot to another, we drove, we swam, and we moved on. At the very last place we checked, as the light of afternoon faded into a hazy orange, something caught his eye. Underwater, near the shore, were my keys. We were elated and could not believe our luck. To celebrate, we went back to his place for some drinks. He drove me down a long wooded driveway, and at the very end was a shaded trailer. He told me that he was only renting a room here from an elderly couple, but they were on vacation, so we would be alone. We walked over the creaking porch and entered the trailer. Inside, I could see the kitchen was messy. Not just a couple of dishes, but every surface was covered with mess. He ushered me away to show me his room. It was small and not very clean either. Dirty clothes, mattress on the floor, a Rubbermaid bin with some snacks like Doritos and cheap warm beer. We had sex, the yellow light of the trailer accentuating the stains on the walls. Afterwards, the spark of fun I had felt when we first met had withered, and I felt gross. I decided that it would be our last date. A week passed, and we hardly texted. Our brief fling was ending, and I didn't expect to see him again. My mind moved on to other things. The coming weekend, my friends were coming to town, and I was excited. We made plans to go karaoke together on Saturday night. When the day arrived, I was surprised to see a text from Derek on my phone. "Are you going to karaoke tonight?" it read. I responded that I was, and he texted back that he would be there. "I thought you didn't like karaoke," I asked him, and he said that he'd been invited by a girl he worked with, and he thought he should give me a heads up that he would be there with a date in case I was there. I thanked him for taking the time to let me know, reassured him that I wouldn't be bothered at all, and I said that I hoped he had a great date. At around 9:30 that night, my friends and I arrived at the bar. The dim lights and reflective foil stars, an all too familiar scene. We got our drinks and picked a booth with a good view of the stage. I had a strange sensation, like someone was watching me. I turned my head, scanning the bar, and our eyes locked. Derek and his date were a few booths away, and he was watching us. He waved zealously with a big smile. His date turned around to look, and I managed an awkward wave. I was absolutely fine with him being on a date, but I didn't want to advertise that we knew each other or make his date uncomfortable. My friends were all aware of the time we'd spent together, my thoughts on the experience, and the text he'd sent me earlier. We were all thinking it was a bit odd that he would go out of his way to interact with me in front of his date, but no harm, no foul. He was just being friendly. The evening carried on, and we all had a great time, basking in the atmosphere, drinking in the songs and laughter. A couple of hours in, we were sitting in our booth when Derek stumbled over to our table with his date. He introduced her as Kate and sat down beside me, pulling her down into our booth next to him. The strong smell of alcohol oozed off of them, and I could see they were hammered. It became obvious they'd both had too much to drink. Their eyes glazed and words slurred. Kate seemed really nice, despite her state, and she launched into a drunk story to the whole table. My friends and I were fairly uncomfortable, and were unsure what was going on. Under the table, I felt Derek's sticky hand slide onto my thigh. His date was right there, and I was stunned. Without making a scene, I suddenly removed his hand and excused myself to get another drink. As I walked across the room, I could feel his eyes raking my back. And sure enough, when I turned around, he was watching. When I got back, Kate was slurring that her taxi had come. She and Derek exchanged a sloppy kiss and goodnights. And then it was just us and Derek. Derek's mood shifted after that. He was drunkenly unaware of how uncomfortable the table was, and we could tell that he was brooding about his date having left without him. Derek turned his attention to me. He slung his heavy arm over my shoulder and leaned in, his sour breath managing to come together to form clumsy sentences. "You're so cute. I love your laugh." I was rigid and just wanted him to leave. When he got up to get another beer, my friends and I spoke about the situation, one of them remarking, "You know you can do better than this, right?" I said that yes, As casual as this had been, I had made a mistake. We came to the conclusion it would be best if we ended the night early, as we didn't see him leaving alone. As a backup plan, if anything went south, we agreed that the girls would go to the bathroom and leave out of the back door while our male friend would distract him and slip away. Derek arrived back at the table, sloshing his beer onto his front. He slurred, "Where are we going next?" I hesitated, but my friend told him that we would all be going home. Derek said he would walk us there, and we politely declined. He was leaning up against a wall and barely holding himself up at this point. We asked him how he was going to get home and if we could call him a cab. Derek drunkenly pouted that he could just come to my place with me. Trying to shut him down as politely as I could, I told him that my child was there with a sitter, so I couldn't have him over. He didn't need to know that wasn't true, however. He refused a taxi and said he would just sleep in his truck. Since his eyelids were drooping and looking at the rest of his state, it seemed reasonable that he would be able to fall asleep in a truck, and we accepted that answer. As we started to leave, he stumbled after us. We stopped and reminded him that we were going to bed. He argued again that he should come with me. My friends and I locked eyes. It was time to engage with our backup plan. The two girls and I excused ourselves to the washroom while our friend distracted him, slipping out the back door. The cool rush of night air hit us, and we hurried to the path that led to their hotel. Our friend caught up with us and said he'd left Derek behind at the bar. We were all relieved to be out of there, and we started to walk back to their hotel. One of the girls was sober and offered to drive me home when we got to the hotel, and I accepted. A few minutes down the path, my phone began to ring. I looked at the caller ID, and I felt my stomach drop. It was Derek. I turned the volume down and let it ring, and to my surprise, he left a voicemail. I turned on the speaker and played it out loud. Derek's voice sounded confused as his words melted together into the phone. "Where are you guys? I thought we were gonna hang out. I don't understand." We were all glad we'd left and agreed that this had been wild. That's when the phone rang again. Another voicemail popped up on my screen. In the dim light of the trail, I played the new voicemail aloud once more. His drunken speech was much more intense this time, as he launched into how he didn't understand why I had left. I'd hurt his feelings, and he was in love with me. The tone of his voice shook me when I heard him say, "I love you." There was something dark and heavy about it that left me feeling unsettled. We were all creeped out, but happy to see the bright sign of the hotel ahead. We traveled the carpeted hallway to their room so my friend could grab her keys to take me home. As we entered the room, my phone began to ring again. This time, the voicemail sent shocks of fear through my body. Derek's voice had taken on an edge as he repeated that he loved me, but he was actually really fucking mad at me for leaving him at the bar. He went on about how could I do that to him. He didn't know what he was going to do. His voice shook with anger as he stumbled over himself, expressing how I had betrayed him. The last thing he said before hanging up echoed in the hotel room. "You know, I'm really starting to fucking hate you." This guy was unhinged, and I was terrified. I was grateful this side of Derek hadn't shown up when we were alone in his secluded trailer. My friends gave me a hug and told me to call them if I needed anything and to keep them updated. My friend took me home, and as I unlocked the door and stepped into the comfort of home, I felt exhausted. It had not been the night out I expected, and Derek's erratic behavior had really freaked me out. Fresh out of an abusive relationship, his actions at the bar, then the voicemails rang some all too familiar bells. That's when I saw the headlights. It was very late for anyone to be driving down my street. I peeked through the curtain. My blood ran cold and I trembled. Sitting in the cab of his orange truck, was Derek. Mind racing, I panicked. This guy could barely hold himself up when we left. He was blackout obliterated. How did he drive across town to my house? How did he find me? I immediately remembered the other week when he dropped me off after my key was lost. How could I have been so stupid? I barely knew him. We'd only met 3 times. Derek's face was stony and etched with rage as he sat in the dark cab staring at my house. He wasn't getting out. He was just staring while I was on my hands and knees peeking out of the window. All the lights were off inside. I was sure he couldn't see me. Then the screen on my phone lit up. He was calling me again. I quickly hid it so he wouldn't see the light. Hands shaking, I played the voicemail as quietly as I could. Derek only said one thing this time, a phrase that sent terror shooting down my spine. In a drunken sing-song voice, almost taunting me, he quietly said, "Where are you?" Click. I was terrified. Somehow I hadn't really considered I could be in danger, and chalked up all of the fear to my past experiences. Surely I wasn't overreacting, and it was my fault for reading too much into this. I shouldn't be this scared, and I don't want to make a scene. That last voicemail sealed the deal. I figured even if I was overreacting, at the very least, he was a drunk driver. I called 911, and the dispatcher said someone would be there in a couple of minutes. As I peeked out of the window, I saw him get out of his truck. He was done waiting. His heavy feet stumbled as they hit the pavement, and he looked around. Derek's voice cut through the night. He started yelling my name. The wild anger in his voice was tangible through the walls, and he just yelled into the street, "Where are you?" Derek started to stumble towards my house when the flashing red and blue lights cascaded down the street, lighting up his face and highlighting every ounce of rage carved into his features. 2 police cars pulled up and the officers got out. I was still peeking out from inside my dark house and couldn't hear much of what was happening. I watched them breathalyze him, which he obviously failed. The officers inspected his truck. They all spoke for a while, and one of the officers came to my door. I spoke to him about what had happened, and he was very empathetic. He said as unsettling as his actions had been, there wasn't much they could do without a direct threat. The officer let me know they would be taking him in for the night, and he would be charged with drunk driving, but that he would be out tomorrow. He told me to make sure I kept my doors locked and stayed safe. The tow truck came to remove his orange truck from the road, and I could see him arguing. The officers weren't having any of it, and they turned him around to cuff him. As the handcuffs locked around his wrist, he yelled out one last time, looking directly at the window I was peeking out of. "I know you're in there, Chelsea. Why don't you come out to say goodnight?" As quickly as my street had filled up, it was empty. The quiet shadows of late night swallowing the earlier chaos into nothingness. Derek texted me the next afternoon. "I'm very sorry about last night. I was in a bad place." I responded that his actions were unacceptable, and how dare he show up at the house my child lives at, and that I would prefer not to hear from him again. He apologized one last time, and I haven't heard from him since. Over the next few months, I would see him on a bike going to and from his workplace, so I know he lost his license. I was always wary that we would bump into each other, which thankfully never happened. I can only imagine how much angrier he was after that night lost him his license. I found out that he moved to the mainland a while back, which was quite a relief for me, and I no longer feel as on edge around town. So, Derek, let's never meet again. I'd like to think I have pretty decent instincts now when it comes to knowing who has bad intentions, but I wasn't always as cautious and observant as I am now. When I was in high school, I always felt so ugly. I had low self-esteem and anxiety, which was really more of a problem rather than my looks. So if someone of the opposite sex gave me even a little attention, I would start to like them. I was pretty innocent despite how desperate I was, having only kissed one boy. So when I was 17 and a college guy put interest into me, I immediately clung to him. I was on this app before Tinder, and I met a guy who lived 7 hours away from my home city. His name was Brandon, and he was gorgeous. Blonde hair, muscular, blue eyes. He played soccer for his university and was 19 years old. Honestly, he wasn't my usual type. I really liked guys with darker hair and eyes. I still do, but he was really handsome and really kind. He would shower me with compliments and talk to me all the time. I lived alone. It's a long story, in an apartment with just my cats, so when I would get lonely or scared, he always comforted me. A month into talking, he started asking for pictures, not ones of my face, but obviously nudes or bra pictures. Now, this was nearly 6 years ago, and I didn't have a good concept of stranger danger on the internet. I mean, smartphones had only really been around for 2 or 3 years at this point, at least in my school with my age group. 17-year-old me was so insecure. I wanted to make him happy because I couldn't believe I'd gotten a guy like him. I was ready to do anything he asked. I never sent naked pictures. I was too insecure for that, but I would send pictures of me in my bra. He would shower me with compliments, saying how sexy and beautiful I was, and I fell for every word. With time, I started to get upset though. I wanted to see him. I would always send him pictures when he asked, but he never sent me any. He would show me body pictures of him with his shirt off or things, but the pictures were always of bad quality. When I started getting too persistent, he promised he would start calling me. For some reason, this appeased me, and we'd talk many times a week. After a couple of months, he got increasingly more sexual with me, telling me what he wanted to do with me, and how badly he wanted me. This made me nervous since I'd only ever kissed a boy, but it also made me a little excited. It felt good to be wanted by someone I'd really grown to like. This was all during the first semester of my senior year of high school, and I was going to turn 18 the next semester in late January. As it got to Christmas time, he started to talk about coming to my city to see me for my birthday. This had me really excited since I wanted to see him in person so badly. We had first talked about me going to him, something he had insisted on, but I chickened out and said I couldn't do the drive alone. An excuse. I really didn't want to go to an older guy's house and stay with him alone. My own house made me feel more safe. We planned on a weekend after my birthday, and everything seemed fine. But then one day in my choir class, my best friend, an exchange student from Germany, was talking with me about him. I was telling her about him and showing pictures, and she got very unsettled. "Have you seen him on video?" she asked. I told her no, and she gave me a skeptical look. "Something doesn't feel right. There's no way he's real. Not that you couldn't date someone like him, but he is too perfect," she said. She was very direct and blunt with me about it, something my other friends weren't. So I took her words deeply, and I'm so thankful I did. I immediately asked him for a picture of his face. He made up some excuse about how he couldn't take a picture right then. So I persisted, asking every day. Finally, my instincts were kicking in, and I was getting scared. I told him I wanted him to video call me. He said no. I fought on it for hours one night, telling him that if he tells me the truth, I won't get mad. He refused. I put the name he gave me into Facebook, determined to find him on my own if he wasn't going to give in. Nothing came up on him. I texted him, telling him I couldn't find his Facebook, and he gave in, giving me a completely different name, and told me, "That's me." I remember just feeling cold as I read that. I looked up the account, and everything he told me was a lie. His name, his face, his age. He was 25, not 19. I was terrified. I thought I'd been talking to someone just 2 years older, which is legal in my state. But he was 8 years older. I immediately stopped texting him. That's when he started getting obsessive. He would text me dozens of times a day, call me over and over again. He would beg me to answer him, to give him a chance. Then he started threatening me to answer. He told me he'd saved all of my pictures. He kept them all and told me he would send them to my friends and family on Facebook, show everyone me and my bra, and show our text messages, talking about what he would do to me sexually if we met. Looking back, all of that was more damaging to him than me, but I was young and stupid and afraid. I hated my body so much, and I was terrified of people seeing it. So I started talking to him again, more reserved and cautious this time. The days inched closer to my birthday and the weekend we had planned. Our messages had become bland and short since I was trying to make him lose interest in me. But he never gave up. If I took too long to message, then he would threaten me again. My birthday fell on a Monday that year, and he sent me all kinds of messages. I don't even remember what I did that birthday. I didn't have many friends, and I've never liked to celebrate, so it was probably small. When Friday hit, I got a text from him that morning saying he was driving to my city and that he would pick me up from school. I was terrified. I had lost a lot of my friends the semester before, another long story, so they obviously had no clue of my situation. Out of desperation, I went to one of my guy friends who I hadn't talked to in a couple of months, and I spilled everything to him. He was a longtime friend, so he was sympathetic and promised to follow me home that day. I went straight to my car, ignoring the mass amounts of texts saying, "Where are you?" and "I'm here." My friend drove behind me all the way to my apartment, which he had no clue I was living in, and stayed with me as I cried for a while. I turned my phone off, and my friend left later in the night. Brandon had no clue where I lived, but I was still paranoid. What if he somehow found me? Only 3 people knew where I lived, 4 now with my guy friend, and he didn't come in contact with any of them. When I finally turned my phone on, he was threatening me again. I was so exhausted and fed up, I started spam texting him, yelling and venting. I told him how stressed he'd made me, and how what he was doing was wrong. I told him to send the pictures, and that I didn't care anymore. I started to attack his character, telling him how no one could love him if he hides who he is, then treats people like shit when they catch him in the lie. Thankfully for me, he had enough care for me to take my words to heart. He apologized and told me he deleted all of the pictures. He swore to leave me alone as long as we can still talk every once in a while as friends. I agreed, even though I knew I was lying. I talked to him for a month, short responses, until he finally gave up. Even now, at 22, I still see his name appear sometimes. I blocked his number and deleted him on everything, but his name still shows up sometimes on my Instagram or Snapchat when he's trying to re-add me. He's the reason I don't give my name or picture out. He isn't the first stalker I experienced. The first was when I was in 6th grade, but that's a story for another time. To Brandon, who lied and collected pictures of me, then proceeded to threaten me with them. Let's not meet. A bunch of years ago, I matched with a guy on Tinder. I was a freshman in college and just got out of a relationship and having fun. I matched with this guy who was 24 called D. He was a little odd, but we had similar interests and went to the same school, so I thought, why not? The red flags started rolling in immediately when I said I would go on a date with him. Of course, the fact that he was much older isn't lost on me as the initial red flag. He tells me that he's not in town, but he would leave his grandmother's funeral early, at a minimum 5 hours away, to come and pick me up. At this time, I did not have a car. He said he would come pick me up. D ended up driving all the way to pick me up. He picked me up in sweatpants, a wife beater, and flip-flops, which struck me as odd because he said he was coming from a funeral. We had made plans just to get a bite to eat and hang out. Since he'd been out of town, he asked if it would be okay if we stopped to pick up his dog. He'd left the dog with a friend. I like dogs, so I was like, no problem. It's dark and we pull up to an apartment complex, and he leaves me in the car and comes back with the golden retriever that's a bit older. The dog immediately starts growling at me, which had never happened to me before, so I started feeling a bit weird. Because we have the dog, he wants to drop him off at his house. This feels logical to me, and I'm anxious to get the growling dog away from me. When we pull up to Dee's house, he asks if I want to come in, and I do. So we walk in, and I immediately knew it was the wrong choice. The house is trashed. There's trash everywhere. Trash bags full along the front entry. Trash on the couch, and just general shit everywhere. Dee lets me know that he has a roommate, but that his roommate isn't home. After brushing the trash off of the couch, he asks if I wanted to sit and play chess. I had expressed that I was interested in learning, and he seemed more than happy to help me learn. This, too, was a mistake. Dee begins explaining the game to me, and it isn't fun first date explaining. He's gotten very serious and is showing me each piece while telling me what it is, what it does, and how it moves. Dee then begins questioning me over each piece, which most I get wrong. Every time I get one wrong, he yells at me the correct answer and tells me to try again. He got more and more frustrated, and it made me very uncomfortable, so I suggested we pause chess and do something else. Dee suggests watching a movie, which is fine with me. The idea of us leaving and going to get food seemingly forgotten. Dee tells me that we can watch a movie in his room, and I oblige. But then he explains that he has to put sheets on the bed because he washed them before leaving for his grandma's funeral. I had assumed we were moving to his bedroom because it may have been cleaner. But when we got in, it's not, and there is no TV in his room. He proceeds to put Iron Man 2 on his phone to have us watch. We watched about 10 minutes of it before things got sexual. I won't tell you strangers the details, but short story short, we didn't do it, but other things went down. I will say those things were consensual. After they occurred, I was feeling really odd about the whole situation and told him I didn't want to have sex. Dee was confused, but did not push it at first. He said fine, and we watched maybe 5 more minutes of the movie before he said he didn't want to watch the movie anymore. He started complaining and asking me why I didn't want to have sex with him. I simply said I wasn't in the mood anymore. He then began pressuring me to tell him exactly what it was about him that made me feel that way. At this point, we had moved from the bedroom back to the dirty living room. You might be thinking, seems like a perfect time to leave, and I thought so too. But this is where things start to get scary. As if he knows I'm thinking about how I'm leaving, he explodes and begins to scream at me. This 6-foot-something man screaming in the face of a 5-foot-nothing young girl. Of course I'm internally freaking out, but I'm trying to make sure I don't piss him off anymore, but also not agreeing to anything. For the next 5 to 10 minutes, Dee screams at me about why I don't like him, why I don't want him, and continuously asks what's wrong with him and to tell him. I try to placate him as best as possible, saying the old, "It's not you, it's me," and "No, I don't want to leave." Again, this man is my only ride home, and I'm truthfully not sure exactly where I was. Though I did have a phone and Google Maps, I did not have Uber at the time. Dee finally calms down when he believes I'm going to stay. He then suggests we try to play some video games. I was in full internal freakout mode, trying to make sure I was playing the part of the interested date, because I was terrified that if he felt I wanted to leave, he would freak out again. We play this game for a while, and then out of nowhere, Dee starts getting upset again. He started yelling about why no one likes him, why no one wants to get to know him, and why no one loves him, saying that he has never had a girlfriend, and all his dates have been one-night stands. Again, I placate him with "I don't know, lots of girls are just snooty like that." At this point, I'm saying anything and everything he wants to hear. He even starts crying about how his mother never loved him, and telling me very deep, dark things about what his mother has said to him and done to him. After he finally calms down once more, he gets up and goes to the kitchen to fix us some drinks. Now, if you're anyone with a brain, you're thinking absolutely not, which was my exact thought at that moment. I decline his multiple offers for a drink. He asks if instead of alcohol I wanted water, and of course I declined that too, feigning that I wasn't thirsty. I stayed at his apartment until about 1 a.m. because I was sitting next to him terrified to, number 1, ask him to take me home, number 2, say I'd walk home, and number 3, figure out how to get an Uber. I'd been trying to download Uber on my phone without him noticing, but then it asks for card information, and that was too hard to do without him noticing. So at around 1 a.m., I yawn very loudly and say, "Oh wow, it's 1 a.m. My roommate's going to be so worried about me." I laugh as if my roommate would be stupid to worry, and that I hadn't been watching the clock since he picked me up at about 9 p.m. I then said, "I'm so tired. I should get home soon." Again, I was really scared that he would freak out, but he didn't explode. He just looked at the clock and said, "Yeah, it is late." But I was not taking any chances, so I said, "I have a great idea. If I get to bed, soon I'd love to have breakfast with you on campus." I was hoping that my offer convinced him that I was intending to see him again, and it did. He seemed very happy at the prospect of it, and jumped up, walking me out of the house into his car. The drive back was excruciatingly long. The ride was completely silent. Neither of us spoke. It was only about a 10-minute drive, but I could have sworn he slowed down every time we got to a particularly dark area or underpass. Dee dropped me off, and I smiled and made a good show of being tired, yet excited to see him tomorrow. He offered multiple times to walk me to my door, but I declined every time and said I didn't want to bother him and that I'd see him tomorrow. I walked myself to the building, and the moment I got around the corner, I sprinted so fast up the stairs and to my door before he could change his mind and follow me to my door. When I got into my dorm room, I genuinely felt like I just escaped a serial killer. Even now, writing this makes my heart race a bit. I never met up with him, but he begged me for multiple days after to meet up with him again. He even asked to pay me $20 an hour to sit near me in the library. I declined, obviously, and only ever saw him once after, at the gym on campus. He didn't notice me, and I left immediately. I've thought about Dee occasionally since the date, and wondered if all those girls he had one-night stands with had the same experience that I did. I still sometimes wonder how many girls there were after me. So Dee, let's not meet again. I'm now 28, but this happened back when I was 19. When I worked in a coffee shop after high school, I had several customers ask me out or ask for my number, and I said no to every single one. However, Dave was persistent. He ordered a strawberries and cream frappuccino from the cashier and chatted me up while I was making it for him. He asked for my number, but I politely declined to give it to him. He got back in line 20 minutes later and ordered the exact drink again. He said, "I ordered 2 drinks. I didn't want to just talk to you again." I thought it was cute, so I agreed to give him my number. We started texting that night and made plans to meet for dinner the next day. He worked at a video rental store and asked me to visit him at work a few hours before we were scheduled to meet up. I stopped by and we went for a walk, where he tactfully blurted out, "So this is just going to be a fling, right?" I was insulted that he was already thinking about hooking up, but somehow he recovered because the date was still on. He made dinner at his house. Looking back, not meeting in public was a bad idea. I realized this. He gave me flowers when I arrived. Things were looking better. After dinner, we played some drinking games with his roommate, Joe, who turned out to be a really great guy and made the evening tolerable. At one point, Joe and I were having a great conversation and laughing a lot. In a sudden jealous rage, Dave snapped at Joe, asking why Joe didn't just take me out. It was scary since I hadn't even known Dave for 24 hours. Joe mentioned that he had to head out soon. When Dave left the room to grab another beer, I begged Joe not to leave me alone with Dave. Joe apologized, but did eventually leave. The evening degenerated from there, with the most memorable bit of conversation being Dave telling me how his dad tried to kill his mom with a shotgun. Luckily, I was saved by a phone call from my younger brother, Matthew. He needed a ride home from a party. I thought, hallelujah, I'm saved, until Dave insisted on coming along for the ride. When we arrived, Dave went to mingle at the party while Matthew said his goodbyes. I sat and chatted with some friends until Matthew signaled that he was ready to leave. The short ride to my parents' house was incredibly awkward and quiet. I walked Matthew to the door, and he told me that he'd accidentally bumped into Dave at the party, and his response was, "Your sister and I were having a great time until you ruined our night. Also, if you bump into me again, I'll break your fucking arm." I gasped in horror as I realized I still had to drive this psycho back to his apartment. Luckily, the ride was without incident, unless you count him trying to talk me into going back inside with him. I firmly said no until he got out of my car, and then I sped away. The next day, I got a text from him saying, "Not a good sign when the flowers are left behind." I responded with, "Not a good sign when you threaten my brother and accuse him of ruining your night." He tried to say he was kidding and that Matthew had taken it wrong, but I didn't believe him, especially after the shady things Dave had already done the night before. Plus, my brother is sacred to me, and I would never let anyone harm him in any way. So the incident from the night before was enough to turn me off of Dave forever. I replied, "Matthew thinks you're a real piece of shit. I trust his judgment completely. Piss off, and don't contact me again." Luckily, he heeded my bitchy text. Looking back, I realized I should have done a lot of things differently, and that I was extremely lucky that Dave never did anything to harm me when we were alone. My brother was only 17 at the time, but he was a big guy, 6'2", 200 plus pounds. I'm not sure why I didn't drive Dave home first and keep my brother in the car with me, but never fear, I have learned from this experience. For some backstory, when I was 19 or 20, I'm 25 now, I met a guy on Tinder. His name was Brad. Brad and I didn't get off to a great start, but I had no idea how bad it was going to get. At first it just seemed we were incompatible as he was pushy and rude, and I take no shit. If it had stopped there, I wouldn't be writing right now. But it didn't stop there. Once I made it clear that I found Brad repulsive and wanting nothing to do with him, his messages took a turn. He threatened to stalk, assault, kidnap, and murder me, along with some gory details about gouging out my eyes and defiling my corpse. What was particularly disturbing was his explicit desire to strangle me and watch the life leave my eyes. He also managed to find my home address 3 hours away from the city we were in and threatened to come find me. As a side note, it was my dad's house, and a small part of me wanted to see exactly how bad it would turn out for him if he showed up there. Of course, I warned my dad and gave him a picture of the guy. I also took screenshots of everything he sent me. The petty. Being a young woman with no idea whether this man would actually go to the lengths to find me, I called the cops. When they came, they looked at the messages, told me it constituted a terroristic threat, but also told me there wasn't much they could do unless Brad actually showed up. They did take down his details, including where he worked, which is listed in his bio. This will be important later. From what I understand, the cops went to Brad's workplace to speak to him, and he refused, so they left. Nothing ever came of it. For the second part of the petty, I found his Facebook. Again, don't put your workplace on all your social media. I snooped around and managed to find a couple of his family members. I sent them all the screenshots along with an explanation of what happened. I didn't hear back for a few days, but when I did, it was from Brad's mom. She apologized profusely on behalf of her son and told me they were driving from Brad's hometown 3 states away to confront him. She asked me not to warn him of this in advance, and obviously I agreed. I don't know what became of this, but I hope he got a good Southern-style ass-whooping. Now for the pro part. A few years later, when Brad probably thought he was in the clear, something jogged my memory of what he did, and I decided it was time for him to face some actual consequences. I made a Facebook post including his picture and bio, all of the screenshots, and a message warning people in our area and asking them to share it around so other women would know what they were dealing with. 2 days later, Facebook took it down, but the damage had already been done. 3,000 shares and many messages later, all that information had made its way to his company's Facebook page. From what I understand, they were absolutely flooded with messages about Brad and his behavior. They responded with a stock message about how they were dealing with it according to their policies. This was disheartening, as I assumed they were just going to blow it off. By this point, Brad had been working for them for at least 4 years. However, I soon learned this was not the case. Several women from his company messaged me to thank me for coming forward and exposing the kind of person they were working with. It was through one of these women that I actually found out what happened to good old Brad. He was called into a meeting with his boss, HR, and the CEO of the company. As a side note, this is a multinational company and the CEO is a woman. They did not take the situation lightly. Within 2 days of posting on Facebook, Brad had been fired and escorted off the premises by armed security. In the end, Brad got what he deserved, and now has a massive blank spot on his resume, as this company was his first job out of college, and he can no longer get a letter of recommendation from them. As far as what became of him, I don't know. I never heard from him again, though I did get a message from his grandmother telling me that what I was doing is illegal.
Reddit, you have to help me. Please, I don't know what to do. Today, my girlfriend Thea decided to go hiking. I know I should have gone with her, but she always does her hikes alone because I slow her down. Usually she's only gone for 2 hours or so. Now, she's been gone for nearly 4. I'm considering calling the police. She should have been home by now. I've tried calling her repeatedly, but she doesn't pick up. All I have is our text conversation from the other day, and as I read it over and over, I feel like something is terribly off. 2:33 p.m. I messaged, "Seen anything cool yet?" Thea responded, "No, I'll send you pictures when I get to the waterfall though." 2:57 p.m. Thea messaged, "You're cooking dinner tonight, right?" "Yeah, chicken pot pie," I responded. "Yum, so excited," Thea messaged. After that interchange, we didn't exchange any texts for about an hour. I whiled away the time constructing pylons in StarCraft. Then, around 4, she sent me a text. 4:06 p.m. Thea messaged, "I found the waterfall." Below this text was a selfie. Thea standing in front of a small waterfall, smiling at the camera, arms crossed, cap covering her wild hair, earrings, the turquoise ones I'd given her on our first anniversary, glinting in the light. I sent a text back, "You're cute," with a smiley face. Then I stopped. Something about the photo bothered me. I stared at her smiling face, blue eyes shaded by her cap, her thick curls of black hair brushing her shoulders. Wait. Her arms were clearly crossed. She wasn't holding the phone. There was no way she could be. Someone else had taken the photo. Or maybe she propped it up on a rock or in a tree, but she couldn't have taken the photo herself. I quickly shot off another text. "Who took that photo?" She didn't reply to that right away, so I'd left the phone on the desk and went downstairs to start prepping dinner. I pushed the creeping anxiety to the back of my mind and focused on the food, putting more effort than usual into cutting the onions. Call me paranoid, but my last girlfriend cheated on me and left my heart broken. Knowing someone else took that photo, and the fact that she hadn't responded to that text when she'd responded to the others promptly, made me feel awful. Come on, she'd probably just asked some passerby to take her photo. Clunk. My knife sliced through the onion, hitting the cutting board with a full thump. What if? When I got back upstairs 45 minutes later, I was relieved to see there was a new text. 4:53 p.m. Thinking of you. Winky face. I frowned. First, she didn't answer my question. Second, Thea doesn't usually send emojis or smileys. GIFs, sure, but not this. It was weird. I responded, "Thinking of you too. Did you get my last text?" Thea replied, "I'll be back by dinner time." Heart emoji. Thea usually didn't send less than 3s to me either. That was more me. In any case, I decided to let it go. I then sent her a message saying, "Okay, I love you." Heart emoji. I unpaused StarCraft and played for a while. I was only interrupted by my phone pinging. I picked it up. A text. 5:37 p.m. Thea texted, "I'm on my way back," followed by an image. The image popped up. It was another selfie. This time, she was holding the phone. I could see her outstretched arm in the lower part of the frame, and she was standing in a much clearer part of the forest. She must have been near the trailhead. I breathed a sigh of relief and began to type. Awesome. Pot pie is already in. And I stopped. My fingers froze. In the photo, just at the edge of the screen, there was something in the fallen leaves. A shadow. A shadow just a few feet from her own, cast by someone off screen. It's after 6 now. Dinner is cold. I've been sitting here, my heart pounding, calling Thea repeatedly. Nothing. Except for one text that came in as I was typing this up. Thea messaged, "I'm going to be home late. Sorry. I love you." Heart emoji. Somehow, I'm sure she wasn't the one to send that text. for an update. Sorry I didn't post last night. So much has happened, and I'm still trying to process everything. I guess I'll start at the beginning. Thea never returned home on Saturday night. A lot of you told me to go look for her myself, so that's what I did. After I called the police, I headed over to the trail alone. Well, not entirely alone. I brought our little dog, Giselle, thinking she might be able to pick up on a scent or something. But as soon as I pulled into the parking lot, my heart dropped. There was her car, her beat-up Honda Civic, parked crookedly under a street lamp. Thea's still here, but she wouldn't do that. Not voluntarily. It was already pretty dark out, and we have a lot of coyotes in the area. She wouldn't be stupid enough to keep hiking past dark, would she? I tried the door to her car, locked. I shined my phone's flashlight in the windows. She wasn't in there. Nothing looked out of place, though it was hard to tell with how messy Thea's car always is. The dread in the pit of my stomach grew. I grabbed Giselle and headed towards the trail. As soon as we stepped into the woods, it was even darker. What remnants of light was left in the sky was choked out by the thick foliage. I took a second to glance at the sign, to figure out which way the waterfall was. Then I continued into the forest. "Thea," I called. "Thea!" No response. I looked at Giselle. She didn't seem to be picking up on anything. I tried to call Thea again. She didn't answer. All I had was that last text staring me in the face. "I'm going to be home late. Sorry. I love you." Heart emoji. As a last-ditch attempt, I sent a text back. 8:23 p.m. "How late? Where are you? I've been calling you." I watched as the indicator went from sent to delivered, and then to read. My blood ran cold. My fingers flew over the keys, starting to type. "Where are you? Please call me." But then I stopped. If it really wasn't Thea writing those texts, if it was someone who had her, maybe that wasn't the smartest thing. I stood there in the middle of the woods, my heart pounding as Giselle whimpered at my feet, and then I typed, "That's fine if you want to stay out late, but I'm going to bed. I love you. Good night." 3 little dots appeared in response, and then it popped up. She messaged me, "No, you're not." I stared at those 3 words, my head swimming. What does that mean? Giselle pawed the ground a few feet away, and then another text came in. It read, "You're out here looking for me. I hear you calling my name. Why don't you come a little closer?" Winky face. I grabbed Giselle and broke into a run. Over thick roots and large stones, the terrain sloped up, then down. Out of breath, I stopped, shining the flashlight in a circle around myself. "Thea!" I screamed, straining my ears for something, anything that might sound like her. A rustle, a footstep, a sound, anything. But there was nothing. I pulled out my phone and sent another text. I wrote, "Where is Thea?" And then, finally, I did hear a sound. A pinging. That strange little tone. The one I'd heard all over the house for the past 2 years. Whenever Thea got a text or an email, it was Thea's phone. Right out there, somewhere, in the darkness. I blindly ran towards the sound, but as soon as I stepped off the trail, the terrain changed. A deep slope, a carpet of dry leaves. I hadn't gone 10 steps when I stepped on the uneven surface of a jagged rock. My ankle buckled. I lost my balance. I careened into the darkness. Thud. Then a rustling sound off to my left. The snap of a branch. I pulled myself up as fast as I possibly could. Pain shot up my ankle, but I continued blindly forward, waving my phone every which way. White light flashed across gnarled trunks, yellowed leaves. Giselle barked at me from the trail, but I didn't see anything. I sent Thea another text. Tell me. And then I listened, but there was no ping, no footsteps, no rustling, nothing, just silence, punctuated by Giselle's barks. The police arrived soon after that. I told them everything. I showed them the texts, showed them where I'd heard Thea's cell phone. They didn't find her, but they did find something in the parking lot that I'd missed. A turquoise earring. I didn't sleep on Saturday night. I drove around town for hours, looking for anything suspicious, asking late-night partygoers if they'd seen anything. I called the police repeatedly, checking in on their search. Nothing. And then, when the sun broke over the treetops, my phone pinged. To my surprise, it was Thea. 6:42 a.m. Thea messaged, "I'll see you soon," smiley face. A selfie popped up, but this one wasn't like the others. The photo was dark and grainy. The forest was all grays and shadows, maybe just taken after sunset or just before dawn. And there, leaning against a tree, was Thea, arms hanging at her sides, hair wild, her cap pulled so far down, her eyes were completely hidden in shadow. Just looking at it made me feel like throwing up. I sent the photo to the police immediately, but they haven't been able to do anything with it yet. I thought they had some technology where they can pinpoint the location of a cell phone. But either they haven't been able to do it, or they don't want to tell me yet what they found. But there's one thing I haven't told the police. Tonight, I got one final text from her. After nearly 48 hours without Thea, after my fruitless search in the forest, after everything the police have done, this is all I have. One final text. 12:01 a.m. She messaged, "Are you going to come find me?" Winky face. I think maybe it's time to return to the woods. Final update. You guys pointed out that going into the woods was a bad idea. You're absolutely right. When I wrote that, I'd had maybe 2 hours of sleep and about 5 cups of coffee. I wasn't thinking clearly. That text was a trap, sent by whoever took Thea. I handed everything over to the police, even the final text. They were able to find out what cell tower Thea's phone was pinging off of. But, unfortunately, the area encompassed most of the park. I organized a small search party to go around town and search. We also posted all over social media. Everything came up empty. Wednesday rolled around with no texts, no leads, no word from the police. And then Thursday, each hour that went by without hearing anything, I got a little less hopeful. Several times I forced myself to look at those 3 photos she sent me, to look for clues, but they only made me feel sick. And then Friday happened. I'd started the day as usual, checking in on the social media groups, looking to see if anyone found anything out. I made some coffee and was about to call the police to see if there were any updates. And then my phone rang. When I saw the caller ID, I couldn't believe it. Thea. I snatched the phone and immediately picked up. "Thea?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. Silence on the other line. "Thea, tell me where you are, please." Silence. "If this is who took Thea, please, I'll do anything. Don't hurt her. I'll pay ransom. I'll do whatever you want. Just please, please don't hurt her." No one spoke, but I did hear something now. A faint cracking sound. Maybe static, the wind blowing through the speakers. "Please, Say something, I pleaded. My heart pounded. My legs shook. I glanced around the kitchen, my mind racing. Can't the police trace the call? Do they need to be on the line? Do I need to keep the call for 60 seconds? I had no idea. Do you want money? I asked, my voice trembling as I opened my laptop. We don't have much, but I'll wire it all to you, right now. Please, just give Thea back to me. I began placing a wireless call to 911. The crackling sound intensified. Please. The call dropped. I immediately told the police, begged them to trace it, to do something, but they just gave me the same canned responses they had for the past several days. So, I got in my car and drove. I didn't even know where I was going, but then I found myself pulling into the parking lot, staring at those same dark trees and winding trail. I was debating whether I should actually go in when I saw it, a plume of dark smoke rising above the treetops. I jumped out of the car and ran into the forest, all while that horrible crackling sound played in my head. Thea, no, no. I climbed over the rocks and sticks, following the acrid smell of smoke. Please, don't let it be. The fire stood in a small clearing, orange flames licking the air, black smoke billowing up to the sky. Thea's remains were found in the fire. God, saying that. Her remains. How can you say that about someone you love so much? Such a cruel, horrible thing to say. Thea, my wonderful Thea, is gone. Since I got the news, I've been sitting in the kitchen, downing whiskey as I flip through photos of us in our final days. A photo of us on the boardwalk, her grinning and holding a stuffed teddy bear, me standing stiffly beside her. I remember that trip, how annoyed I was that she wanted to play every game in the 90-degree weather. What an idiot I'd been. Every minute with Thea was a gift. I flipped to another photo, a selfie of us on the couch, her grinning as she held up the bowl of pasta we'd made from scratch. My thumb hit the screen as I started to flip to another photo. I stopped. Is that? In the photo, I could see our front windows behind the couch. I could see the neighbor's lights across the street, see a car rolling by on the road, and I could see something else, an irregular shadow. I zoomed in. The photo quality wasn't great. Grainy swathes of blue and gray, but even so, I could see what it was. A figure, crouched between our two bushes, looking inside. I stared at the blurry shape, frozen. Then I flipped to the next photo. Thea and I sitting on the floor a week prior, playing with Giselle. And, zooming into the window, I saw that same awful shape, crouched just outside the halo of our back porch light. The next one, the unknown assailant peeking in through an uncovered corner of our bedroom window. No. I flipped to the next photo. Oh God, no. No. Thea standing in the laundry room, balancing a basket on her head and sticking her tongue out at me. But behind her, inside the house, a sliver of darkness poking out from around the corner. Not a shadow, but someone standing there. Yip. I jumped a foot as Giselle let out a shrill yelp from the family room. I scrambled over to her sitting in front of the window, staring into the darkness outside. Yip. Shaking madly, I stumbled over to the front door, clicked the deadbolt into place. Then I cupped my hands over the window and peered out. Nothing. I ran through the house, making sure every window, every door was locked. I closed the curtains, even slid the lock across the basement door. Then, knowing I was safe, I collapsed into the couch and began dialing the police. In a few minutes, they'll be here, and they'll know everything. They'll find the bastard that killed Thea, who has apparently been stalking us for months, and we'll make sure he gets the worst sentence he possibly can. Thea will get justice. It's finally over. Or has it just begun? I knew Mark was a widower when I met him, and honestly, I was relieved. Of course, I wasn't happy that somebody died, but at my age, 37, most of the men I met on Match.com were divorcees whose wives had left them for good reason. Affairs, gambling, really poor hygiene. So Mark was a standout. Nothing had gone wrong in his marriage. His wife had just, sadly, gotten cancer and passed away. After a few dates, I knew he was the one. From his twinkling blue eyes to his infectious smile, from the way he asked about my day to the way he held me on cold nights, he was wonderful. Of course, nobody's perfect, though, and that's where the wig comes in. He brought it out 3 months after we'd gotten married. "Would you be open to wearing this sometimes?" he asked with a sheepish grin. I couldn't help but laugh. It was so stereotypical. Bleach blonde hair coiffed in a blowout sort of hairstyle, with long curtain bangs that curled at the bottom. I began to giggle. I guess. You're into that, huh? I wasn't blonde. Far from it. My hair was nearly black, from my Hispanic ancestry on my dad's side. But it didn't bother me. If I were younger, I'd be up all night, wondering if he secretly hated how I looked. But now I was old enough to know people have fantasies. Hell, maybe I'd ask him to apply a temporary tattoo to his bicep next time. "You want me to wear it tonight?" I asked. "Maybe," he responded. Sounds fun." I reached out to touch the wig. He took a sudden step back so that it was just out of my reach. "Sorry," he said hastily. "This is just a really expensive wig. The oil on your hands, over time it'll damage it." That annoyed me. Here I was, being really open to whatever fantasy he was going to throw at me, and he was mad that I'd damage it, but whatever. "Sorry, won't touch it," I said. "So, tonight then?" he asked, with a big, stupid grin on his face. "Tonight," I replied. He waited in the bedroom while I put the wig on. I'd only worn a wig once before, when I was a teenager dressing up as Morticia Adams. It was one of those cheap, plasticky ones from Party City. But this one, Mark wasn't kidding. It must have been expensive. The blonde hair, besides being perfectly coiffed, had a natural sheen that was neither too shiny nor too dull. Even though it was a cheap bleach blonde color, there was beautiful variation in the strands, bright flecks and highlights on top of gold and taupe. The only part that seemed cheap was the cap, or scalp, or whatever you call that thing the hair attaches to. It was stiff and rough under my fingers, and an ugly mottled tan color. I wasn't sure how exactly I was supposed to get it attached to my head. Maybe bobby pins. "You almost ready?" Mark called from the bedroom. "Yeah, just a minute," I replied. I brought the wig up to my face, careful to touch the hair as little as possible. As soon as I did, I wrinkled my nose. It smelled overly flowery, like someone had doused it in perfume. Where had Mark been storing this thing? After several minutes and 20 bobby pins, I got it on. I hope this doesn't take long. Damn, I know it's a horrible thing to think before having sex, but I didn't like the way it felt on my head. It felt oddly heavy, pulling at my scalp every time I moved, and it was weird having hair brushing my shoulders that wasn't mine. "Okay," I called out. "I'm ready." We made love, and it was incredible. The kind of earth-shattering experience that makes you feel like you've left your body maybe this entire world for a moment. It bothered me a little, actually. Why wasn't it this good when I wasn't wearing the wig? Maybe he really was into blondes. I found myself researching Schwarzenkopp bleach on my coffee break, even though I wasn't the type to change myself for a guy. On Saturday afternoon, he asked me to wear it again. I obliged, less enthusiastically this time, and then he asked me something else. I just finished dressing, reaching up to take the wig off, and he said behind me, "Don't take it off." I whipped around, my eyes narrowed. "What?" "Sorry, I meant." He paused, as if carefully wording what he was going to say next. "What if you didn't take the wig off right away? What if you wore it for a little longer? You know, cooking dinner, hanging out." Okay, this was too far. "I'm not going to keep it on," I said. "Why not?" he asked. I scowled at him. For one, it smells, and it's uncomfortable. I don't like it. I could see the look of disappointment on his face. I'll be honest, it hurt. What was wrong with my own hair? If he was so obsessed with blondes, why did he marry me? There were thousands of blonde women out there. Why not marry one of them and forget the wig altogether? "Can you just keep it on a little longer? You look so beautiful." He smiled at me. "It really just becomes you." I was really annoyed at this point, like seriously annoyed, but I was old enough to know that bargaining was a much more effective way to make both of us happy. "I'll wear it if you make dinner, but as soon as we're done eating, I'm taking it off." "Sure," he grinned at me. That stupid, big grin that I was really starting to hate. Over the coming weeks, the wig situation escalated. Almost every weekend, Mark brought it out of the closet, holding it in his hands tenderly, carefully, as if it were a delicate little kitten. "Want to wear the wig?" he'd always ask, as if it were my idea. I didn't want to wear it, but when I did, I noticed Mark did extra things for me. Cooking dinner, doing the dishes, buying me gifts. Slowly, I began to just accept it. If wearing the thing got me out of chores, what did I have to lose? And besides, it wasn't such a big deal. I didn't wear Spanx or push-up bras or lots of makeup. Was wearing a wig really worse than those? I will say, though, it was weird how Mark seemed against the idea of me bleaching my hair. I figured that would be a better, more permanent solution, but he was 100% against it. He threw out every reason in the book. It's so expensive, and it takes so much upkeep. You'd have to do the roots every few weeks. And besides, the wig just becomes you. I hated how he said that. The wig becomes you, like the wig was becoming an appendage, a part of myself. In the end, I don't know how I let it go on for as long as it did. I guess I just told myself it was a stupid fantasy that he'd get over, sooner or later. Boy, was I wrong. I'd never seen a photo of Mark's first wife with hair. The few photos on her memorialized Facebook page were after she started chemotherapy. She was either wearing a hat or a bandana, never a wig, despite Mark's apparent obsession with them. But one night, I got curious about her. Curious if he pushed this weird stuff on her before the cancer. Did he make her dye her hair, wear a wig, or was she naturally blonde? After an hour of poking around, I got my answer. There was a wedding album in the attic, tucked away with some of Miranda's belongings and stuff from their life together. Mark was out with some friends. He wouldn't be home for a few hours, but I still got a swoop of nervousness in my stomach as I pulled it out onto my lap. Our wedding album. It read in gold-scrolling letters across the faux white leather cover. And there, on the very first page, was my answer. Miranda had the same hair as the wig. I mean exactly the same. The same color, varied shades of gold, the same hairstyle, blown out with curtain bangs. It was identical. Is she wearing the wig? Or I didn't want to consider the second possibility. Maybe that was her natural hair, and he'd gotten an expensive, custom-made wig to look exactly like it, and he was making me wear it so I'd look like her, so he could pretend I am her. The album fell out of my lap. This can't be happening. He'd seemed so normal, especially about his wife, grieving but past it. A wound and old scar that had never healed over. It had been several years since she died. Apparently, I'd been dead wrong. I picked the album back up and flipped through it for a little while. I studied her face, her scalp, looking for a scene. But the photos had that professional airbrushed quality to them. If there had been any evidence it was a wig, the photographer cleaned it up in Photoshop. I finally closed the album, went downstairs, and waited for Mark to get home. I've never been one for subtlety. By the time he got home, I'd been stewing in my own thoughts for 3 hours. I brought the wig down and put it in the middle of the kitchen table. The blonde hair shone in the dim light, hanging limply on the faceless plastic stand. Then I heard the jingle of keys, the click of a lock, his footsteps as he came towards the kitchen. You made me wear a wig so that you can pretend I'm Miranda, right? I immediately started. He froze in the doorway. Yeah, that's right. I got you, you son of a bitch. I slammed the album onto the kitchen table and pointed at the first picture. Miranda's hair looks exactly like that wig. His face went white. He opened his mouth and closed it a few times, as if trying to find the words. You don't understand, he finally choked. Oh, I think I understand perfectly well. You're playing some sort of sick game where you're trying to turn me into your dead wife. He swallowed, glanced behind him as if afraid someone was crouching there, listening to us. Then he turned back to me, his voice lowered. I only made a wig out of her hair because... Wait. My stomach dropped as I parsed what he was saying. Did you just say a wig out of her hair? He said before I interrupted. It's her fucking hair, I demanded to know. He sheepishly nodded. I stared at the thing, my stomach roiling. Golden strands hung limply off the wig holder, draping onto the table. A dead woman's hair. Of course, I should have known. It looked so beautiful, so real. And that hair had been on me. Bobby-pinned to my head, brushing against my shoulders, my bare shoulders. Fuck, I even pulled one from my nether regions the last time we had sex. I felt sick. I'm leaving, I said quietly, shooting up from the table. I ran up the stairs and grabbed my overnight bag, wildly grabbed clothes off the hanger, stuffed them inside, grabbed my laptop, chargers. His heavy footsteps thumped up the stairs, and then he appeared in the doorway, a hulking shape dimly outlined by the kitchen light spilling upstairs. Leave me alone, I snapped, shoving my clothes in as fast as I could go. Surprisingly, he did not reply. No apologies, no pleading with me to stay. I ignored him and continued packing. I reached over and grabbed my AirPods from the bedside table, throwing them in. Then my phone. Strong arms grabbed me from behind. I screamed, but it was no use. He was so strong. And then I felt it, something touching my head. He was pressing the thick, stiff cap of the wig onto my head as he held me still. I heard his voice whispering something in a strange rhythm in my ear. Then everything went black. My hair is blonde. I'm standing in the bathroom, admiring myself. There's a bloody seam at my scalp, but other than that, I look okay. Mark comes up behind me and wraps his arms around my waist. I love you so much, he says, kissing me tenderly on the cheek. I forgive him for what he did. I understand everything now. Last night, I got up in the middle of the night and wrote it all out. Everything that happened before today. I had to get it out of my system. It was like a nightmare that kept replaying in my head, even though the bloody scene is evidence that it really did happen. But now it's over. Now I'm who I was truly meant to become. I comb a hand through my blonde hair. Then I turn to him and smile. I love you, Mark, I say. I love you too, Miranda. A little jab of something in my heart. Sadness, perhaps. Should I feel sad that he's calling me her name? But I don't feel sad. Not really. I'm happy now. I wrap my arms around him tighter. Then I pull him into a kiss.
It was a quiet morning, and I was performing my routine as I would any other day. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, brushing my teeth, half distracted by the buzz of my mind as I went through a mental list of things I had to do. I was glad to hear that my daughter, Emma, had woken up without me nagging her and had been getting ready for school by herself, moving through her own routine on the other side of the house. I could hear her moving in her bedroom, the creaky floorboards giving her away. I felt a flicker of relief that she was managing on her own. She was now 12, independent in many ways, though she still had a tendency to be a bit absent-minded in the mornings. It was one of those rare moments where I didn't have to nag her to get going. I smiled to myself, turning back to the mirror to finish my routine. But then, the sound of a door creaked open from the hallway. Emma's bedroom door, I thought. It wasn't an unfamiliar noise, but it was enough to make me glance toward the sound. I expected to see her shuffle past the bathroom door, heading for the kitchen or to the bathroom to finish getting ready. Instead, there was nothing. The footsteps continued, a soft shuffle across the hallway, the faintest rustling sound that seemed to follow the movement, but there was no sight of Emma. I waited for a moment, thinking she might just be moving slowly, but then the unmistakable sound of my bedroom door opening reached my ears. It wasn't the sound of a door just swinging open. It was the distinct creak of a door pushed inward, and still, I hadn't seen her pass by. A creeping unease began to curl at the edges of my mind. Why hadn't she walked past? Why had the door opened with no sign of her? I assumed she was just too sleepy to bother with the light, as she often did on groggy mornings. It was a small thing, but I couldn't shake the sensation that something was wrong. I pushed it aside, thinking it was just my overactive imagination. Finishing up in the bathroom, I walked down the hall toward the source of the noise. When I reached for the bedroom light switch, the realization hit me like a cold gust of wind. The light was off. I frowned. Emma had turned off the light. Maybe she was trying to save electricity, but that wasn't like her. I stepped into the room to check, my heart beginning to pound. But the bedroom was vacant, still, silent. A shiver crawled down my spine. I blinked, trying to make sense of it all. Had I imagined the sound? Had I misheard? But no, I hadn't. I had heard it clearly. The door creaking open, the soft footsteps in the hallway, and yet there was no one here. No sign of Emma. I stepped back into the hallway and moved toward her room, my pulse quickening. What the hell was going on? When I opened Emma's bedroom door, she was still there, curled up under her covers, fast asleep. Her breathing was slow and steady,
completely unaware of the confusion and dread building in my chest. She looked perfectly peaceful, as if nothing had happened, as if I hadn't just heard her walking through the house, as if the door hadn't opened on its own. For a long moment, I stood frozen in her doorway, watching her sleep. I felt a cold unease seep into my bones. Was it possible I had simply imagined the entire thing? Could I have been mistaken about hearing the sounds? No, I knew what I'd heard, and yet there she was, sound asleep. What the hell was going on? I stepped back into the hallway, trying to shake the growing knot in my stomach. I couldn't make sense of it. I didn't want to entertain any darker thoughts, but the questions lingered. What had been in the bathroom? What was it that I'd heard moving in the house? Had something or someone been mimicking her? The thought was absurd, but it wouldn't leave me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd missed something, that something had happened, something I couldn't explain. The day passed like any other. Emma seemed fine, laughing and chatting, her usual energetic self. There were no signs of anything out of the ordinary. I tried to convince myself that I'd simply been too tired, too stressed, that my mind had played tricks on me in the stillness of the morning. But when night came, and I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, the unease resurfaced. That feeling, the one that had crept into my chest like a shadow, was still there. It gnawed at me, making it impossible to relax. I kept replaying the events in my head, trying to find a rational explanation, but nothing made sense. I couldn't sleep. I wasn't sure how much time passed, but eventually, I found myself standing in the hallway again, outside Emma's room, staring at her closed door. The air in the house felt thick, almost oppressive. It wasn't quite fear, but something far more unsettling. A feeling that I wasn't alone, that something unseen was lurking just beyond my senses. I turned away, trying to shake off the sensation, but it lingered. I made my way downstairs, hoping a cup of tea would calm my mind. As I sipped, a thought struck me like a bolt of lightning. I had completely forgotten about the bedroom light. I hadn't mentioned it to Emma, and yet the light had never been turned on. I had a small west-facing window in my bedroom that meant on dreary days I had to turn on my light in the morning. There's just no way I would have been able to gather my clothes with the light off. I conceded maybe I had turned off the light when I left the room by mistake. Over the next few days, small, unexplainable things began to happen. Footsteps that weren't mine, whispers in the empty house, doors creaking open when no one was around. I'd find things out of place. Emma's shoes in the hallway when I knew she hadn't left them there. Her hairbrush on the kitchen counter instead of her room. At first, I convinced myself it was stress, that I was just being paranoid, but every time, the feeling returned. Cold, gnawing, undeniable. Something was wrong. One afternoon, Emma and I were sitting in the living room. I heard it again, the bathroom door creaking open. The sound was unmistakable, and my heart skipped a beat. I glanced at Emma. She was right there beside me, her attention focused on her switch. "Emma," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper, "did you just go into the bathroom?" She looked up at me, puzzled. "No, Mom, I didn't." I stood up, my breath quickening, and walked toward the bathroom. The door was wide open. There was no one inside. The light was still off, but the room felt wrong. It was too still, too quiet. The air itself felt thick, like something was waiting. By the time the weekend came, I was unraveling. I had spent hours combing through online forums, desperate to find some explanation for the strange events. Stories from people who'd experienced similar things. Footsteps, whispers, and encounters with someone who looked like a loved one, but wasn't quite them. Doppelgangers, shadows, something darker. The more I read, the more it seemed like the pieces were falling into place. I wasn't losing my mind. I wasn't imagining things. Something, someone, was imitating Emma. It was as if some malevolent force had taken on her shape, her voice, her presence, and was trying to replace her. But why? What did it want? Then it happened again. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when I glanced down the hallway and saw her. No, something that looked like her standing by the bathroom door. She was facing me, motionless. Her expression was blank, her eyes wide open, too wide, unblinking. "Emma," I called out, my voice shaking with a mix of confusion and dread. The figure didn't move, didn't respond. I took a step forward, my heart racing in my chest, and then I saw it, the face. The skin was too pale, stretched tight, drained of color, like a mask barely clinging to the bones beneath. It wasn't her. "Emma," I asked again, my voice trembling. The figure remained still. It didn't speak. It didn't move. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished, disappearing into thin air, leaving no trace. I couldn't breathe. I needed help. I called my best friend, Amelia. I explained everything, every terrifying detail. Amelia didn't laugh. She didn't call me crazy. Instead, her voice lowered with concern. She had heard of things like this, spirits or entities that could impersonate loved ones, mimicking them, but twisted and wrong. She suggested I shouldn't face this alone. I couldn't stay there any longer, not with that thing in my house. I grabbed Emma and we left. Amelia kindly offered to let us stay with her for a while. As we drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. For just a moment, I thought I saw Emma in the upstairs window, staring out at me. Her face was pressed against the glass, emotionless, her eyes empty. I flicked my eyes to the road ahead, and when I looked again, the house was dark, empty, but the chill in the air remained. It followed us, and as the miles stretched between us and that house, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that that thing had created. It's been a few days now since we left, and I have to go back to the house tonight to pick up some essentials. I don't know what I'll find. I don't know if I'll be able to handle it, but I'll update you on what I find. This is a personal account. I lived in Waynesboro, Virginia for about 5 years, less than 10 miles to the Blue Ridge Parkway north entrance, Skyline Drive south entrance. I used to take bike rides along Skyline Drive all the time, and always kept a year-long membership. Only in the day though, just to frame the story. One night, I was having a particularly hard time settling in for bed, so I decided to start the bike up and ride up to the first overlook on Skyline, only about a mile inside the park. It was about 11 p.m. when I got up there, and pitch black. I killed the bike and got immediately uncomfortable. I'm not a guy that gets spooked in the dark. Truthfully, I prefer the dark in most situations. You can see people before they see you. You are practically invisible, unless someone is looking for you.
and I find the natural privacy comforting. Not up there, though. It was a thick, oppressive dark, worse than anything I experienced outside of a cave, and worse than any moonless night on the Appalachian Trail. I immediately got hinked out big time. There's nothing up here besides wildlife, I reassured myself internally. I had my .44 revolver, from when I lived and hiked in the Pacific Northwest, bear country and all that jazz. It was tucked into my CCW holster, so I knew I definitely outmatched anything that could be up there, two-legged snakes included. So I sat in the dark, leaning against the bike for a while, and looking at the few lights I could see in the valley below. I managed about 10 minutes before I physically felt the hair raise on the back of my neck. I only did 27 months in Iraq, but I remember that precise feeling. Someone was watching me. Something bad was coming. It was the same sensation I would get before IDF came in, or the shooting started somewhere nearby. I'm no psychic or whatever, but it's a common thing among vets with any time under their belt. Ask them about it. You can feel hateful eyes on you. The overlook was a sheer drop, or nearly so I wasn't concerned about anything popping up in that direction. But the mountainside and thick, untamed woods were behind me. I started thinking about methed-out guys creeping in the Appalachian Trail, bears and the like. The Appalachian Trail is no stranger to random violence. Still feeling creeped out, I took up a seat on the waist-high stone wall that marked the overlook ledge, facing the woods. Again, I can't emphasize how dark it was. But grizz, you might say. Why not turn on the bike and use the lights? It'll at least help you see what's close. True, my bike is loud, and the last thing I wanted was attention. Plus, the light would just night-blind me to anything just out of view, and the noise would obscure any stealthy-sounding creeping going on. So no thanks. I'll watch and listen for a bit. I sat in the dark for another 10 minutes or so, anxiety getting worse and worse. I heard a few things, but nothing out of the ordinary for a night in the woods. I decided to head on home since the feeling wasn't going away. Like I said, I had a big bore on me, so anything playing games would be in for a powerful surprise if the games got stupid. Hopping onto my Suzuki, I started it up and rode off towards the gate. Now, anyone who lives in the country and rides a bike knows that wildlife is crazy active on roads that aren't often traveled at night. Being nighttime, and technically closed, I had to ride around the gate to get in. There were no other vehicles on the road at all. I hadn't seen a single other person since leaving Waynesboro proper. The speed limit was 30 miles per hour, but I clipped along at a measly 15 miles per hour to keep an eye out for deer and wildlife. It wouldn't do me any good to fuck myself up in a wreck, only to lay there all night until someone happened to cross me in the morning. Then I saw it. The term of almost deer is really fitting, but not quite accurate. It was like a deer that someone who'd never seen a deer drew, but only after someone else described it to them. It stood on the left side of the road, the mountainside, and I saw the eyes long before my headlights had shown it fully. It was big, easily the biggest deer I've seen, and the lack of any horns that time of the year suggested that it was a doe. The head was almost bovine in shape, but fixed to a deer's frame. The legs seemed too long in proportion to the body. Think maned wolf proportions, and the body was extremely barrel-chested. I've always been creeped out by malformed wildlife, and this was no exception. Unfortunately, I had to get it to move, or risk passing within a few feet of it. I was not traveling another 30-plus miles up the road in the other direction to leave through another gate in the middle of the night, and I wasn't getting close to it. Dangers of it spooking and running into the side of my cruiser aside, I didn't want to get near it at all. Stopping and putting my feet down about 30 feet away from it, I tried to frighten it away. I flashed my beams down to low and back to high. Nothing. I revved the engine. Nothing. I honked a considerable horn. Nada. Resting the bike on the kickstand, I left it idling and hopped off. I yelled at the thing, and it still didn't budge. So I started to the side of the road to grab something to toss near the deer thing, hoping to spook it that way. As soon as I crossed into the other lane, it rose up onto its hind legs. I froze, putting my hand on my weapon. I wasn't about to get charged by an angry, confused, malformed doe. It took 2 jerky, unnatural steps towards the center of the lane on 2 legs and froze again, staring directly at me. It suddenly shook its head wildly, like a dog with a toy, took another short step, and then hopped on 2 legs several times until it disappeared into the darkness on the right side of the road. I stepped back to the bike, mounted it, kicked up the kickstand, and turned the light towards the side of the road. On that side, there was a sheer drop-off about 70 to 80 degrees compared to the roadway, and the fucking thing's head was just peeking over the edge, still looking at me. The drop-off was about 40 to 50 feet, so there's no way it was standing at the base of the mountainside. I cracked the throttle and beat the hell out of there. Road wildlife be damned. I never went back up on Skyline Drive at night alone after that. One time was enough. There are things we don't grok out there, or things that just visit for a while. Whatever it wasn't from around these here parts in Hilltop. It can go back to wherever it came from and stay there. His shoulder was broken, the arm hanging limply at his side like a loose bag of sand. Sweat forced itself out of the pores on his face, and skin peeled off the burns on his hands. It wasn't a good position to be in under the circumstances, and the situation didn't seem likely to improve. But he did have one thing working in his favor. He didn't care if he survived. "Are you all right?" I asked, cringing at the ludicrousness of the question. He looked up at me, his eyes swollen nearly shut. "Yeah, I'm just peachy," he said, sarcasm dripping from every word. "Sorry, I just don't know what else to say," I replied. "Isn't much to say, is there? Unless you want to talk about..." "No," I said, before he could finish the sentence. "Let's talk about how we're going to get you down from here." He leaned over, wincing as he did, and peeked over the side of the cliff. "How about you give me a little shove? That should do the trick," he said. "Very funny. You know I'm not going to do that," I retorted. He glared at me. "Then maybe I should give you a shove and make things quicker." "How about we focus on the positive?" I said to him. "You know this only ends one way. If you try to save me, you get killed in the process, especially with..." "We don't know for sure, okay?" I said, packing up the supplies we had and trying to form some kind of a plan to keep us alive long enough to get us to safety. Besides, we've been best friends since what? Grade school. If I hadn't already been tempted to toss you off a cliff, I'm not gonna start now. I stepped over to the edge and glanced down. The wind whipped me in the face, sending a chill through me. Even though it was spring, there was still enough chill in the air to make me shiver. I watched as the sun headed toward the horizon. It would be dark before we got out if I didn't hurry up. My right knee collapsed as he kicked me in the back of my leg. I stumbled, my knees hitting the ground hard, rolling me toward the edge. My hand shot out and grabbed the log, saving me from a horrible death hundreds of feet below. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I said, lying on the ground and breathing hard. "I told you, this only ends one way. Might as well get it over with." I stared at him, not believing what I was hearing. "You're serious," I said. "I thought you were just being you. Look at me."
I'm in excruciating pain. My shoulder's a mess. I have burns on my hands, and I'm not going to be able to climb down. And even if I could, there's no safety from. We have to try, I said. I didn't bring you here to die. I wish you wouldn't have brought me here at all, he replied. There was no way to know this was going to happen, I replied. He stared at me. Doubt filled his eyes. I turned away and focused on filling my pack with what I hoped was the right combination of supplies. I couldn't make the pack too heavy because I needed to lower him down and possibly carry him too. I tied together all the rope we had and double-checked the knots. I clipped the carabiner to his climbing rig, checking to make sure it was still intact and the fire hadn't damaged it. I stepped back to admire my handiwork. He was doing the same. Really, he said, this is your big plan. Sure, I replied, smiling, proud of myself and my ingenuity. Why not just ring the dinner bell for every predator as you dangle me like a carrot? You know what? You're right, I said. It's not worth all this trouble. I raised my foot and shoved his good arm, sending him toppling over the edge of the cliff. I heard him scream as he fell, and then silence. Thank God, I said, sighing. I was getting so tired of listening to his whining. I heard that, he said from over the edge. I stepped up and peered over. He was dangling there, 10 feet from the top of the ledge. Oh, damn, I thought I killed you, I said, chuckling. He looked up and saw me peeking over. You bastard, he said. Well, isn't that what you wanted? For me to throw you off the cliff? How's that working out for you? He glared daggers at me. Makes you appreciate life when you think you're about to die, doesn't it? I said. You'll pay for this. For saving your life. Okay, I'll take responsibility for that. I began the long, arduous process of lowering him down. I only hoped I had enough rope. After a while, the strain took its toll. I was exhausted and sweaty. My hands slipped, and I had to quickly recover to keep him from smashing into the ground. I managed to slow the rope at the cost of my hands getting rope burn. I tied it off to a tree and leaned over to check on him. You okay? I yelled. I couldn't see exactly what he was doing. It looked like he raised his arm, but I couldn't tell. I grabbed my binoculars and peered down, only to see he was giving me the finger. Same to you, I yelled. I need to take a breather. Will you be all right for a few minutes? His answer was to slump his head. I guessed he was taking a nap. I sat next to the log and got out a bottle of water, taking a long drink. After a few minutes, I pulled out my knife and cut some strips off the bottom of my shirt, wrapped them around the palms of my hands, and tied them off. Why didn't I think of that before I started lowering him, I thought. I was about to start another session of lowering him when I saw the rope vibrating. That's weird, I thought. What are you doing down there? I yelled, stepping to the edge and looking down. My spine turned to ice when I saw nothing. He wasn't there. Adrian, I yelled. No response. Adrian, I yelled again, quickly pushing away thoughts of the Rocky movies. I pulled the rope, and it came up with no resistance. I reeled in the entire length, and at the end, there was no sign of Adrian. The rope didn't look like it had been cut. It looked like it had been torn or chewed. I stared at it for a long time. Memories of the horrible events that led up to this moment overwhelmed me. I collapsed to the ground in fear. My eyes darted around like my head was on a swivel. Every tree became a hiding place for that thing. I could feel it lurking behind every bush. My mind started replaying when the trouble first started. We made it to the top of the cliff and celebrated by starting a campfire and making some coffee while we set up our tents. Adrian was actually in a good mood, if you can imagine, and we stayed up by the fire until well after midnight. The following morning, his mood changed. Way to keep me up all night, asshole, he said, pouring a fresh cup of coffee and looking like he needed it. "What are you talking about?" I asked. "Don't play innocent," he said. "You know you were hanging around my tent, circling it late last night, growling and pawing at the ground, trying to scare me." My eyes went wide as he talked. "I swear, I was in my tent the whole time. I fell asleep as soon as my head hit the pillow." "Then what was making all the racket?" he said, with doubt creeping into his eyes. "Maybe I was snoring and you heard that. Trust me, this wasn't a snore." "Well, if it wasn't me, then..." I narrowed my eyes at him. "Wait a minute. I know what you're doing." "What am I doing?" he said, looking at his coffee cup. "You're trying to scare me with some campfire ghost story, hoping I'll wig out. I'm telling you, it's not some campfire story. It really happened." "Yeah, okay," I said, making it clear that I didn't believe a single word. "I mean it," he said, starting to get angry. Okay, I said. "Don't get your panties in a bunch." "You better," he started saying, and then stopped. His eyes were focused on something behind me. "I'm not falling for that," I said, refusing to look until I heard a branch snap behind me. I turned and saw. I shook my head to clear the memory. "I don't want to think about that right now," I told myself. "I need to focus on finding out what happened to Adrian." I stood and checked my supplies, then double-checked to be sure the rope was securely tied to the tree. I avoided looking around for fear of what might be lurking. Then, once everything was set, I stared down at the deadly ground that waited for me to make a mistake, muttered a quick prayer, then jumped off the cliff. Rappelling down was more difficult with a pack on my back and rags wrapped around my already rope-burned hands. I took it slow, working my way down the same way Adrian had gone. I also went slow for fear of finding what I didn't want to find. I knew it was possible, so I made sure to be as quiet as I could. The rock face was rough, and I did my best not to knock any loose pebbles or do anything that would announce my presence. In the best-case scenario, his ropes got frayed on the rocks and broke. I hoped I would find him laying on an outcropping nearby, unconscious but alive. As I descended, I noticed an opening in a rock wall. My rope was in a straight line with it. I imagined Adrian's rope was too. I stopped and swung myself over to the rock face, grabbing a bigger rock and pulling myself to it. I pulled my rope up and stashed it. I then climbed down the side of the opening. There was a small ledge in front of it that I landed on and peered inside. It was dark as pitch. Even though the sun had just set, it seemed like daylight couldn't penetrate the darkness. I pulled out my flashlight and slowly explored the opening with it. It turned out to be a large cave. I stepped inside, and walking upright, my head easily cleared the ceiling by a good 3 feet. Curiosity overtook me as I shined the light around this newfound hall of mysteries. There were no markings on the walls, and the floor was rough like the cave had formed naturally, instead of someone making it. But then why would someone make a cave halfway up a cliff face when it's nearly impossible to get to? I wasn't sure I really wanted to know the answer. As I continued inside, the air became cooler. I hugged myself and fought off a chill. This cave was much bigger than I originally thought. I walked a short distance before I noticed the smell. Actually, it was 2 smells that intertwined with each other. The first was the smell of fire. Not like a rushing wildfire coming to burn me to a crisp, more like a campfire. The second smell was much less encouraging. It was the smell of decay. Some animal had died in here. There was no doubt about it. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if perhaps I had explored far enough. My wondering ceased when I remembered why I was in here in the first place. Adrian was still missing. If he had come down here, it didn't seem like he was coerced. At least I didn't see any sign of drag marks on the ground or a struggle. But then again, it was hard to tell on the rough rock floor. I suddenly stopped, unsure of what to do. The passageway split in two. I shone my light at the right one, and then the left. Neither seemed to show any clue of which was the correct path. I stared at each for a long moment, then mentally flipped a coin and went right. As soon as I took a few steps, I could feel a strong wind blowing in my face, carrying the smell of fire and rot with it. I nearly backed up and took the other path, but this was where I would most likely find Adrian. At least I hoped I would. As I walked, I noticed a slight glow ahead. I turned off my flashlight and followed the ever-increasing light. When I turned the corner, I saw Adrian lying on the ground in front of the fire. He didn't seem to be injured. Well, at least not any more than he already was. I didn't see any blood near him. I did, however, see a pile of bones tossed in the corner behind him. It disturbed me to see the pile and think about my friend's bones eventually laying there. I took a step forward to go check on him, then suddenly stopped. The huge rock that had been sitting by the fire suddenly moved. I recognized it right away from the size and color of the hair that covered it. I stepped back out of view and began shaking. I knew I only had two options: kill this thing or hide from it. There was nothing in my bag that would kill it. I didn't have a gun with me, and I doubted a pocket knife would do the trick. I had to find somewhere to hide until it left. My mind ran in circles, trying to think of a hiding place, when it dawned on me. I turned and went back to the other passageway as quietly as I could. Once there, I stopped inside, thinking it would be a long cavern like its counterpart. However, it was almost immediately blocked. I shone my flashlight on the blockage and was horrified to find it was piled up with clothes, shirts, pants, shoes, and even the occasional backpack. It was all piled nearly to the ceiling of the cave, and more disturbingly, each article had blood on it. There didn't seem to be any that escaped damage either. Most were ripped or chewed, probably like their unfortunate owners. I remember hearing about hikers going missing in this park, but I thought it was just normal stuff like in any other park. People get lost or fall into some hidden crevasse or ravine. I guess not. My mind screamed for me to get out of there, fast, but I needed to know Adrian was okay and somehow try to rescue him, although at the moment that seemed impossible. The longer I stared at the clothes of these poor, helpless victims, the more it formed into an idea. I grabbed some of the clothes and pushed them aside, digging my way toward the bottom of the seemingly endless pile. I wondered how many missing people it took before a major investigation started. I reached the bottom and took my pack off, setting it beside me. Then I pulled the clothes down on top of me, leaving a small space for me to peek out through. There was just a hint of light coming from the mouth of the cave, but it was rapidly dwindling. I slowly unzipped all the zippers on my pack, so I had easy access without making a sound when I needed something. I settled in and tried to make a comfortable seat out of the clothes. My conscience was not happy using the clothes of murder victims for comfort, but I saw no alternative. If I ran, that thing would hunt me down. It already found us once. I must have been more tired than I thought. Once settled in, I fell asleep almost immediately. I turned and it was there. I wasn't even sure what it was. It was dark and hairy. It stood on its back legs but hunched over as if readying for an attack. I was petrified. "Adrian," I said. "What?" he hissed. "Is that what you heard?" "Yeah, I'm thinking so," he said quietly, barely moving his mouth as if the monster wouldn't attack if you didn't speak. "What do we do?" I asked through clenched teeth. "How the hell should I know?" he replied. It was circling us and moving closer at the same time. Its sharp teeth dripped with drool. "Did you bring a gun?" I asked. "No. Did you?" I slowly shook my head. It stopped and looked at me, as though it understood the whole conversation. It stopped lurching and stood to its full height. It must have been at least 8 feet tall. It lunged at me with incredible speed. I screamed and tried to run, but my foot got caught on the log, and I fell over backwards, knocking the wind out of me. In the end, that was a good thing. The monster lunged at my torso, but since I fell, my torso was laying on the ground with the rest of me. It flew through the air, sailing right over me. I looked over at Adrian and saw his pocket knife in his hand. The monster saw it too. It narrowed its eyes at him and snapped its jaws. I was surprised by how much its head and snout reminded me of a dog. This was my thought as I lay there on my back, helpless, unable to breathe. I watched as it lunged at Adrian. I saw him plunge the knife into its chest, and it howled in pain. It never slowed, even as he stabbed it. It merely twisted in the air as it grabbed his arms, pinning them to his side. I heard the crunch as they both landed together on top of Adrian's shoulder. He screamed as they continued to roll right into the fire. Adrian tried to push his way out of the flames, severely burning his hand by grabbing a burning piece of wood and swinging it in a huge arc, smashing it into the face of the monster. It whimpered and growled, then disappeared as quickly and silently as it came. It took me a while to be able to move. When I could, I crawled over to Adrian, who was laying still beside the fire. "Are you okay?" I asked, rolling him on his back. He screamed in pain as I rolled him onto his injured shoulder. "Sorry," I said. "Get away from me," he said, as I helped him into a sitting position and looked at his burned hand. "Are you all right?" I asked. "Yeah, I'm just peachy." I woke with a start, but I didn't know why. I reached for my flashlight and was about to turn it on when I heard the sound of sniffing. I froze. Every ounce of concentration was on being as still as possible. The sniffing got louder. I didn't dare open my eyes for fear it would somehow see them, and that would be it. I could feel its presence getting closer. I fought back the panic that would make me do something stupid, like try to run. I just closed my eyes and thought about the last sunrise I had seen, hoping it wouldn't be the last one I would ever see. I felt the snout touch the layer of clothes right in front of me, and then it paused, as if it was deciding if it wanted to eat me now or save me for a snack later on. The monster withdrew so silently, I barely knew it was gone. I waited for it to return. I knew it was waiting for me to make a move so it could catch me, but I didn't. I sat still as a statue for what seemed like hours. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to move. I had to stretch. I stood and stretched my arms and legs, still quiet. When I sat back down and made sure I was covered by clothes, I risked a little bit of light through my hand to get a bite to eat. Opening a granola bar without making noise is a tedious job at best. It took me a half hour, and after I ate, my only reward was thirst. I sipped on my bottle of water, avoiding the temptation to gulp it down. I didn't know when I would be able to fill it. I checked my watch. It was 1 in the morning. At the same time, Adrian had heard the growling. I took a chance that this thing would be out hunting at night. I pushed my layer of clothes off of me, grabbed my flashlight, and went to check on Adrian. I stepped carefully and kept my light pointed at the ground just in case. My ears strained to hear any sounds. Of course, there were the echoes of my footsteps, making me whip around, thinking the monster was right behind me. I made it to the main cave without having a full panic attack. The fire had burned low, and a dull orange glow lit the walls. I found Adrian lying in the same spot as before. He did not seem to be moving. I leaned down and listened for breathing. I could hear a faint breath. "Adrian," I whispered, shaking him. "Come on, man. We gotta go." He moved a little. "Adrian," I said, looking around to be sure it wasn't sneaking up on me. "Adrian, come on." He opened his eyes just a bit and put his hand up to shade his eyes from the light. "You still with me, buddy?" I asked. He tried to speak, but nothing came out. "Here, drink some water." I gave him a few sips and he perked up a bit. "Why?" he rasped. "Why what, buddy? Why are you here?" "I came to rescue you," I said to him. "Leave me," he replied. "I'm not gonna do that." In the distance, I heard a howl. It chilled me to the bone. I wondered how far away it was, and if it was celebrating another victim. "Okay, listen, I'm gonna go, but I'll be back when I'm sure it's out of the cave." I gave him another drink. "You hang on, okay?" He closed his eyes and laid his head back down. I stared at him for a moment, then jumped up and ran out of the cave. I turned at the fork and buried myself back under the clothes, turning off the light as soon as I was set. It wasn't 5 minutes later, I heard something lumbering by in the cave. I had cut it too close. I needed to make mental notes of when it went out. I stole a glance at my watch. It was 1:37 in the morning. I drank the last swallow of water and lay down by the nest of clothes. I woke up sometime later. The cave was dimly lit. I could see a bright light coming from the opening, but it didn't penetrate all the way to my nest. I could see the walls near the opening, but not much else. As I watched, a massive shadow blocked my view. It was standing right in front of me. I became still as stone. What was it doing? Did it know I was there? Was it toying with me? Sweat poured off my brow. I knew I was about to die. I gripped my flashlight tight, knowing that it wouldn't do much to the monster, but knowing I'd go down fighting. Something fell on top of me. It wasn't very heavy, so I knew it wasn't the monster. I waited for a long moment, until I heard it walk away before I used the flashlight to see what was on top of me. I shone the light on the pile and found new clothes. There was a shirt, shorts, underwear, and a bra. I knew it from the monster's latest victim. My heart went out to that poor woman. I wished there was something I could do to help her, but there wasn't. I was barely surviving myself. My water was gone. I had 3 granola bars left, and that was the last of my food. I had to do something before I didn't have the energy to escape. This was my last chance. Usually, the monster kept a schedule. I assumed governed by hunger and thirst. I knew it wouldn't go out again for hours. I could leave. I could sneak out and be gone without it knowing I was ever here. But I couldn't. I had to rescue Adrian. But why? My mind asked. Because he's my friend, I fought back. Would he leave you behind? Of course not. He'd be doing exactly what I'm doing now. Really? That's why he tried to trip you and throw you off the cliff. That wasn't real. He was just joking around. He didn't seem like he was joking. He seemed like he wanted to die and take you with him. He was just upset. I kept fighting. How upset do you think he'd be, waiting here in this cave to rescue you? Very. He'd probably be wigging out. He never was much for small places. Do you think he would have left by now? Maybe. But the important thing is, I'm not him. You could leave right now. No, I kept pushing. Who cares if you save your friend and die in the process? My mind threw at me. I do. Do you really think that thing doesn't know you're here? What? I questioned. That thing is playing you. It's stalking you, waiting for you to make a mistake. No, I've outsmarted it. I've learned its routine. I pushed. Keep thinking that. Maybe you can outsmart its teeth as it's chewing you to pieces. I'm not leaving yet. End of conversation. I waited for a response that never came. Even though I had decided to wait, there were things that still bothered me. Was it toying with me? Did it really not know I was here? Why hadn't it killed Adrian yet? Was it leaving him alive to bait me in? The more I thought about such things, the more I felt panic rising inside me. I pushed the clothes aside, and a dull glow shone from the mouth of the cave. It called to me. It told me the coast was clear, that I needed to go right now. I felt my muscles tighten, getting ready to rise and run out of the cave. I pushed the clothes over more, clearing a path, when suddenly I heard something. I quickly and quietly buried myself under the clothes. I had barely stopped moving when I heard the monster lumber through. It paused in front of the clothes, sniffing the air, then turned back toward the mouth of the cave and disappeared. I waited for a full minute before I breathed a sigh of relief. My own ingenuity had nearly gotten me killed. I was sure that thing wouldn't be going back outside for hours, and yet it had left within minutes. I began to doubt myself and my own intelligence for taking such a risk. It was time to leave. I dug out from under the clothes and started for the mouth of the cave. Then I stopped and turned back. I had to try one more time to get Adrian out. I went deeper into the cave, to the main room with the fire pit. There was a freshly made fire, which told me I didn't have much time. Adrian was still lying there beside the fire. I went to him and leaned down. "Time to go, buddy," I whispered. He didn't answer me back. "I know it's going to be tough, but you need to try." I grabbed his shoulders and gently shook him. "Come on, man. You gotta wake up." His eyes didn't open. Something about his shoulders felt wrong. Aside from the fact that one of them was either dislocated or broken and should have caused him excruciating pain, he didn't twitch. The other thing was the shoulders felt cold. Not just a bit chilly. They were stone cold. "Adrian." I pushed my fingers against his neck and felt for a pulse. There was nothing. His neck felt cold as well. I pushed him, and his body clumsily rolled over onto his back. I tried to move his arms and legs, but I couldn't. Rigor mortis had already set in. I stared in disbelief. My friend was gone. Not only was my friend gone, but I had wasted all this time trying to rescue him. Maybe I had killed myself in the process. I wiped the tears from my cheeks and pulled Adrian's body back into the same position. My only chance was for this horrible monster not to know I was here. I stood next to the fire, letting the smoke wash over me, in the hope that it might somehow cover my scent. After a couple of minutes, I looked back over at my friend, said a silent goodbye, and walked back out of the cave. I stopped at my hiding place and climbed inside, hoping this would be the last time I waited for death to pass by. I settled in and took a nap to prepare for my escape. A short while later, I woke up hearing the monster pass by. I waited. When I thought it was time, I slowly and silently packed my backpack, then stood to leave. As strange as it sounds, I knew I would miss this place. It had been a refuge of safety for the last 2 days, even though it was a constant reminder of death. I stood at the edge of the pile and tried to rearrange them so that nothing looked amiss. Then I turned toward the mouth of the cave and started making my way out. It was late afternoon, and the sun shone brightly in my face, blinding me. I hadn't realized how bright the sun was until I was without it for a couple of days. As I stood at the mouth of the cave, my first problem presented itself. I looked over the edge and was a good 50 to 80 feet to the ground. That would be why people left the cave alone. They couldn't get to it. I searched the surroundings, looking for a solution when one presented itself. There were vines hanging from the trees that looked like they might support me. The problem was they weren't in reach. My arm would need to be a foot or so longer. They sat so tantalizingly close that I had to try leaning out to grab one. That ended when I nearly stumbled off the ledge and fell to my death. I searched for any other way, but there was none. I just had to go for it. I backed up a few steps, then took a deep, cleansing breath and ran. I jumped at the last minute and grabbed for the vines. My hands wrapped around them, but I was already falling, and I had to wrap my legs around them too and squeeze for all I was worth to slow my descent. My hands and legs were burning as they slowed me, but I didn't dare scream. The cave was still too close. Even sliding down the vines may have been too loud. My hands were failing. I didn't know how much longer I could hang on. My fingers let go one by one, and I fell. I landed on my back, and the backpack cushioned my fall. Fortunately, I'd only been around 10 feet from the ground when I did. It still knocked the wind out of me and left me there laying helpless as I looked back up at the cave opening. Only, I could no longer see it. It must have been invisible from ground level. Once I could breathe again, I focused on getting out of there. I stood and tried to get my bearings. The sun was setting, so I knew which way was west. It was around 2 miles to the south where the trailhead was. My car, my salvation, waited there for me. I made my way through the trees and headed south when there was an opening. Before I knew it, I had run across a trail. I stepped onto it, feeling more relieved than I had in days. Then I heard something in the brush behind me. I froze. I turned toward the sound and saw the predator. It was a mountain lion, not the horrible monster I had just escaped. But it didn't matter. If this cat was hungry, I'd be just as dead. I tried to nonchalantly continue walking on the trail, hoping it would lose interest. My walk turned into a power walk, and still the lion followed. It seemed to be closing the distance between us without breaking into a run yet. I tried to remember what to do in case of a mountain lion attack, but all I could remember was, don't run. I thought of this as I power walked away from the pursuing cat that was getting closer by the minute. Suddenly, I was hit from behind. The lion jumped on me. Fortunately, it had jumped on my pack. Its weight held me down, making me helpless as it climbed up my pack, heading for the neck. I covered my head and neck, hoping to survive. I could feel its hot breath against my fingers. I knew an attack was imminent, and then it stopped. It lifted its head, and I could hear it sniffing the air. In an instant, it leaped off of me and was gone. I sat up and looked around, not believing my luck when I noticed the forest had gone silent. The only reason a predator runs away like that is that there's a much bigger predator in the area, my mind reminded me. I had a very good idea which predator had scared it off. This was it. Fight or flight. I jumped up and ran at full speed down the trail. I didn't know I had that much energy left after the last 2 days, but death is a great motivator, and I knew this thing wasn't coming to congratulate me for escaping its lair. My legs burned. I had a stitch in my side. My backpack was throwing off my balance, and I nearly fell. But I could see the trailhead. There was a glint of metal that was on the front bumper of my car. All I had to do was keep going. I could hear it panting behind me. My footsteps weren't the only ones running on the trail. It sounds more like a gallop behind me. For a fleeting moment, I almost stopped to see if I was being chased by a horse, but I knew that would be a fatal mistake. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the keys, pressing a button and unlocking the doors. I didn't want to make the same mistake I'd seen in dozens of horror movies. I was one of the ones screaming the loudest when the victim dropped the keys. I ripped open the driver's side door and dove inside. I had just shut it when a nightmare landed on the hood. I stared at it for a moment, transfixed by this horrific apparition. It looked like someone had taken a dog and turned it into a horrible beast. It was massive, at least 8 feet tall. Its fangs were sharp and red. They rolled onto the windshield as the red eyes stared at me. It reached back with its paw and smashed into my windshield, nearly breaking through. I woke from my stupor and started the car as it smashed the windshield again, this time breaking through. It shoved its snout inside and snapped at me as I put the car in reverse and floored it, turning hard and making the beast tumble off to the ground. I threw it in drive and stomped the pedal to the floor. The car lurched forward with rubber screeching in protest. I gained momentum when the monster landed on the roof with a crash. It began pounding over and over. I saw claw marks coming through the metal and into the cloth on the ceiling. In desperation, I began swerving back and forth, trying to shake the monster loose. Metal and rubber protested at my maneuvers. With the extra weight on top, I wondered if the car would flip and end my escape in bloody fashion. So far, the road had been a park drive that was never meant for such speeds. I knew there was a hard turn coming up, and I wouldn't make it as fast as I was driving. I slammed on the brakes, sending the monster flying. I stomped on the gas and swerved around it, continuing to gain speed. As tempting as it was, I knew if I tried to run it over, my car would never survive. And right now, survival was all that mattered. I looked in the rearview mirror, and impossibly, it was catching up to me. I saw it leap, trying to land on the car again, but I swerved in time, leaving it only asphalt to land on. I made another hard turn, and I was on a state road. The monster followed me, but I was able to get enough speed to finally escape. I breathed a sigh of relief as I sped toward town. I didn't bother going home. I went straight to the police department. After waiting a half hour to make it to the front desk, I was finally interviewed by an officer. When I started my story, he seemed to be only mildly interested. By the time I was done, there were 6 officers standing around listening. "That's one hell of a story," the officer said, looking around at the other officers, smirking. "It's true," I said. The officer sighed as the others dispersed. "I'm sorry, son. As entertaining as that was, I'm too busy to go chasing around the woods, hunting after some urban legend." I took a piece of paper off his notepad and wrote down a series of numbers. "What's this?" he asked when I handed it to him. "I had my GPS with me," I said. "Those numbers are the location of the cave that has all the evidence you need. Listen, son, without something concrete, there's no one who's going out to the middle of the woods chasing a fairy tale." "Well, maybe that'll help," I said, getting up and setting my backpack on his desk. I opened the zippers and dumped clothes out on them. Whoa, what's this?" "Concrete," I said. "These are the clothes of this thing's victims. If you take DNA samples from sweat and blood on them, you might find matches to some people who have recently gone missing." "You're serious," he said, looking from the clothes to me as if just waking up. "Yes," I said as I got up and started toward the door. "If it's not too much trouble." I walked out, leaving several officers staring at the pile of clothes. I got into my destroyed car, hoping it would start, and headed home. The entire way, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror. After all of this, there were 2 things that captured my thoughts. 1, I would be barricading my house as soon as I got home. And 2, I wouldn't be sleeping soundly ever again.
Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that. If you have a scary story you'd like me to read on the channel, please send me an email or post it to my subreddit. You can find details of this in the video description. It's the stories that make this, and this is the best way to ensure variety in the stories I share. Thank you all for listening, and a special thanks to my channel members and patrons who now have special access to ad-free videos and other behind-the-scenes content. Once again, thank you guys for listening. Have a great night.